It's 4 days after the biggest earthquake here in a century, and we're the first foreign journalists inside Idlib to see the devastation. They know all about misery here. They've endured nearly 12 years of war. Now they're fighting to survive a natural disaster, and they're doing it in the awful realization that once again they're on their own. So they dig through the night. The white helmets, so used to pulling people out of bombed buildings, now trying to sift through rubble to find those who survived the war, only to die trapped and terrified in the earthquake. They've just found the body of a 4-year-old boy, still in his pajamas. His father can hardly contain his despair and disgust at how he was left to die alone with no help from outside.
Who's helping us? In Turkey, they're getting everything. They've arranged special flights to bring aid in from all over the world, but no one has come to help us. What did this child do wrong to stay 4 days under the rubble before we found him?
And the agony's not over yet for him. The white helmets are trying to find his wife and his elder son, who's 10. Both are still missing.
The people here are saying this is a real tragedy because it could have been all so different if they'd been given extra specialist, more sophisticated equipment with which to try and locate these people. Remember, some have already been taken out of here alive, but now the chances of finding anyone else alive are extremely remote.
Have you found anything? No is the constant answer. Even finding the body of a loved one is some small comfort in this part of Syria, where comfort is a scarcity. The northwest of Syria is a rebel enclave packed with about 4 million people who fled Bashar Al Assad and his regime in Damascus. The head of the militant Islamist group which controls the area turned up to give us a rare interview, and he was blisteringly critical of the world's response.
They're taking too much time, and it's costing the lives of those trapped under the rubble. A lot of people are dying because of the weak response of the international community. They're the ones responsible for all these deaths.
He was once a member of the terror group Al-Qaeda before forming his own breakaway group, which he says is now focused on fighting AQ, as well as ISIS and the Assad regime in the Syrian capital. He has a $10 million bounty on his head, but he tore into Western leaders for ignoring the needs of civilians in Idlib.
The people who died in the earthquake were not terrorists. They were innocent civilians. They were women and children. So to confuse humanitarian issues with politics is a big problem.
In the first week after the earthquake, we find only bodies coming over the Turkish-Syrian border in any quantity. Little meaningful aid has made it across. These are people who have fled the war in Syria to find sanctuary in neighbouring Turkey, now being returned in body bags. It is the saddest of homecomings for their relatives. So they're having to make mass graves in Idlib to cope with the hundreds coming home from across the border, as well as those who've perished here. They simply can't make them quickly enough. They were already struggling with the impact of an unequal war. Now more unbearable loss. A final kiss for a newborn baby, a life cut off before it had even really begun. This is a tragedy on top of a grinding war and earthquake calamity. They're talking here of deaths after the quakes caused by poor medical facilities, of the struggle without shelter, of the need for food and water, of the urgency for just about everything. So there is misery upon misery, and the news no one wanted. Salim found his wife and son's bodies, and with that discovery, a whole new depth to his suffering. He's now lost half of his family, 2 sons and their mother. For a child in Idlib, there seems no end to grief. Life for them is all about death. Salim has to somehow console his one surviving daughter, 8-year-old Mace. Calm down, my daughter, he says. Okay, my love? This is God's will. Do you love me? I'll always be with you, he says. They have each other, but that is all. The trauma in Idlib never seems to stop. It just gets worse and worse. And 2 weeks on from the first, there's more terror with a second set of earthquakes. We return to find people really struggling and anger building. Aid is still only trickling into northwest Syria, and people are digging through their ruined homes for scraps of their possessions. The UN's already admitted it failed to mobilise help quickly enough, but on the ground we find little evidence this has morphed into any visible support. Yet there are stunning tales of endurance and courage of rescuers who refuse to give up. This was once 4 apartment blocks, unrecognisable now. There were concrete slabs one on top of each other, he tells us. Up to 100 were dead inside, but remarkably, at least one teenager called Rima was still alive. The White Helmets volunteers and Rima's relatives were working with very little. No heavy machinery at all at this point, just their bare hands and a lot of ingenuity. They managed to squeeze their way through the gaps, following the sound of her screams until they found her, cold and terrified, and with her right leg pinned down by tons of concrete. The only way to free her was to amputate her leg, there, under the rubble. She can't remember much of her ordeal, just her desperation to get out. When I was trapped in the hole, there was a dead man next to me. She goes on. I was really afraid. I just wanted to get out. Rima, like other survivors, are finding living with the aftermath is a further Herculean challenge. And all we spoke to are bitter at how they've been left to this fate.
What did the Syrian people do wrong? What is our sin that the world left us like this? Are our lives worth nothing? Why? We're human beings. We respect humanity and respect human rights. We're not barbarians.
Why were you so late, it reads. We were waiting for you. They will remember those who helped the people here and those who didn't, long after the rubble's been pieced back together again. The hospitals are packed with children like Arslan. How are you, he says. My love. Open your eyes for me, he's saying. It means lion, and he's living up to his name. He is the sole survivor in his family. Both his parents and his 2 older siblings died in the earthquakes. His uncle is now his guardian and is willing him to be strong. But his body has taken a battering. He has terrible crush injuries to his legs, and the doctor says he may need both amputated. He'll certainly never be the same again. The fact he's here at all is a miracle. We make no apologies for this video being upsetting. It is gruesome, but this is the reality. The bodies of Arslan's siblings had already been found by this point. But this is Arslan's father, Suleiman. His dying act was to use his body to shield his youngest child. As he's pulled out, you can see Arslan's arm poking through the stones. He's wearing striped pajamas. He's the last to be recovered. They hope against hope he's alive. Then, as he's dragged out of the rubble, they realise he is. His eyes flicker open. Unbelievably, he's made it. He's alive only because of his father's love, but it's just one of many battles ahead for the toddler. And the medics insist the delay by the UN in sending aid is responsible for his suffering.
Why don't give them the care that they need? They're injured, and is this people or these children is responsible about Assad and border and international community? Can he understand? He lost everyone. He's a single one of his family. He don't know anything about this and don't care about this. And I don't care about this. I want this patient to survive.
And as well as the injured, there are the earthquake babies, born prematurely as their terrified mothers scramble to safety. Fatima weighs a kilo. The feeding syringe next to her is almost as big as she is. Every movement she makes, however small, is welcomed by the nurses. It shows a fighting spirit she will need to survive, being born in the midst of an earthquake and in a country at war. The number of babies like Fatima, violently arriving early into the world because of the earthquakes, has jumped by 50% according to the doctors here. And with 4 ventilators being shared amongst about 20 little ones, the chances are many of these babies will not survive to see life outside these wards. Do you think you can save any of them? Or is it just too difficult right now?
We'll try our best to save all of them, but right now the border gate to Turkey is closed and it won't be enough to depend on just the equipment we have here.
Many are too scared to stay inside their homes, and even hospital patients, including children, are still so fearful of more tremors and aftershocks, they prefer to sleep outside. Visiting Canadian doctors also joined the chorus, criticising the UN, saying it was responsible for many lives lost.
This is because of the late response. If the response was early, we could have saved many lives. This is simple. I think you understand that. You don't have to be a physician or surgeon to understand that. A crush injury, if you wait 4 or 5 days, the outcome is going to be very bad.
And even those with lion hearts haven't been able to defy the politicking. A few hours after we left Idlib, Arsalan, the little boy who survived the war and then the earthquake, lost his fight for life, killed by what the doctors believe were bureaucratic battles. Alex Crawford, Sky News in Idlib, northwest Syria.